All right, and I would like to introduce Jacquelyn Raftery-Helmer.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. Um, so, um, my name's Jacquelyn Raftery-Helmer. I'm an assistant professor in the psychology department. And today we're going to talk about motivation. Motivation is my area of research. And so I think a lot about this. And so I'm excited to be doing this with you. Um, so I'm going to share my screen. You'll see like I have a million things going on since I taught earlier today. Um, Let me see. I always like lose the chat. Hold on. I've somehow lost the chat. This happens to me all the time when I am teaching. Where'd it go? Where is it? There it is. Okay. Just in case folks are wanting to get in touch with me. So there are two ways to participate in this workshop today. So you can unmute yourself at any point and either raise your hand or just shout out what you want to say, or you can always write in the chat box. So let's talk about motivation. But first, I always like to start to get a little information from you all as to, and I do this in all of my classes because I want to hear why you're here. Were some really cool workshops offered at the same time. So I'm curious why you chose this workshop and what you're hoping to get out of it. And the reason I ask you this is because I will tailor this workshop to your needs. So there are two ways that you can answer this question. You can choose to respond in the chat or just raise your hand and I'll call on you. But I'd like to hear from everybody. So however you feel comfortable responding is great. And I'm going to find the chat again, which somehow has gotten lost. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Okay. So I want to hear from people. Why did you choose this workshop?
Professor?
Yes.
I like the description. I had a boss that was like this. You write that it's going to talk about concrete ways in which to create climates that foster high quality motivation, performance, persistence, and creativity. I had a boss like that once, and it was great. I really enjoyed that. And I don't know how he did it, so I want to know how he did it.
Cool. And what's interesting that you said, Lori, is that yeah, I had a boss like that once, and what's interesting is that you're not saying all of my prior bosses have been like this. Almost, it's almost like an anomaly that motivation is something that leaders think about, and so I personally think that's a problem. That all good leaders should be motivating, and so hopefully you'll get information here that can help you in that regard. Okay, other reasons why people chose this particular workshop. Okay, so I'm hearing from Riley that Riley's saying, I chose this workshop because I'm interested in motivation. In particular, Riley says, I'm interested in the reason why people do what they do. And I really appreciate what you've said, Riley, because so folks ask, what is motivation? Or when my husband describes my research to other people, he very broadly says, oh, she studies why people do things. And that's exactly it. Motivation isn't the what of behavior, it's the why. The why do we do things? Okay, any other why else are people here? Because again, there were so many different workshops you could have chosen.
I can go, Professor.
Yeah, Julia.
So I actually had you a few years ago.
I know, I recognize that name. I was like,
Yeah,
I
that's
know
me.
you.
So I actually just attended the Empowering Women in Leadership webinar, and being a leader is something that I'm really interested in. And I know that one of the qualities of authentic leaders is the ability to motivate, and also just understanding what makes people tick, how I can motivate individuals to be interested in what I'm leading them on and things like that. So I'm excited to be attending
Oh,
today.
it's great to hear from
Yeah.
you again. And I like what you're saying that motivation isn't just about like getting people to do what you want, but really
Hmm.
getting them to do it in a way that I liked how you said, like, I want to be
Yeah.
a leader that's authentic. Like, how cool
Yeah.
is that? So
Yeah.
hopefully you get something from this.
Thank
And I'm
you.
hearing from Chris, I chose this workshop to learn what motivation is and how I can motivate others around me. So I appreciate that, Morgan, because I think there's a lot out there. You know, there's a lot of different definitions about what it even means to motivate people. And I'm hearing that Morgan says, I want to motivate myself and others. And sure, I that it's important to motivate others, but I like that you said I want to motivate myself. As someone that right now in the middle of a pandemic and having children at home and trying to do all the things, motivation is sometimes hard to come by. And so we'll talk about how can you create an environment to motivate other people and yourself too. So I'm going to reshare my screen, hopefully without losing the chat, which just like keeps on disappearing. I don't know if, oh, there it is. Okay. There we go. Perfect. It's still there. Okay. So I have several goals for today. And at any point, if you want to interrupt me, do that. But my goal for today is to think about what are the common ways that leaders do tend to motivate other people. And what you'll notice is that many of those things I think are probably problematic. That while they might be short-sighted. So the things that bosses often do often aren't the most helpful, which someone alluded to earlier when they said, I had a boss once who helped me really feel creative. And that's because most people don't even know how to foster really high quality internal motivation. So then we're going to spend the remainder of our time together thinking about what really motivates people. And I want to orient our time to help you think about 3 psychological needs. We'll talk about the need for autonomy, the need for competence, and the need for relatedness, because these needs are really at the core of how you motivate people. And I'll spend more time talking about that in a minute. So let's think first, what do you think leaders care about? So you all are leaders or wanting to be leaders in some capacity. So what are the things that as a leader you might care about, or you should care about, or you do care about? And those all might be different, but and again, you can respond in a couple ways. You can either just unmute yourself and speak, or put in the chat. So Riley's saying the desires of the people you are leading. Oh, that's interesting. So leaders care about finding out what makes a person tick, or what their values are, and meeting people where they are at. Morgan saying the needs and passions of the group that you're trying to motivate. And so what I'm hearing from both of you is that we care not just about our own agenda, but it sounds like you really care about, or good leaders should be caring about the other people that they're working with, and what kind of gets them excited, and what they kind of care most deeply about. But Lori, and I'm so glad you said this. Most leaders I've worked with care about producing results. And I think that that's really important, that while we may say we really care about how people feel, or that people are doing work that's consistent with their values, but when it comes to actually meeting leaders, often what they care most about is producing outcomes. And Chris is saying, I care about leading other people to fulfill their purpose. Awesome. So it sounds like many of the folks in this room are wanting to move away from just focusing on like outcomes or achievement or deliverables, and focusing on the well-being of the people you're working with. And so I'm going to spend time telling you that you can have both, that you can really focus on meeting people's needs and the things that they value and their life's purpose, while still maintaining high quality outcomes, because often leaders tend to see these two things as competing, and I'm not convinced that they are. So let's talk a little bit about traditional motivational strategies. And I'm going to let somebody in. Welcome. I think I might have. Uh-oh, what happened? Can people hear me? Okay. Somehow I got. Not quite sure what's going on. I'm hearing a lot of feedback. I think I'm fine now. So traditional motivational strategies tend to use a pay performance model. And this is a system that links incentive pay to the quality of your work or your performance. And so I'll give you several different examples. And so if you work in an environment in which people are given bonuses, this would be an example of a pay for performance model. So you do really good at your job, you get an end of the quarter bonus. You get more money. You see pay for performance models for any type of commission job, where the more things that you sell, the more money that you make. Any kind of setup in which a leader is offering some sort of financial incentive for doing good work or high quality performance is what we would consider to be pay for performance. And so my guess is many of you have worked in environments in which you have used a pay for performance system. And so if folks have examples, I'd love to hear them in the chat. But I'll keep on going. But my sense is that this is kind of the way that business often works, is you use these traditional motivational strategies where you work harder, you do a better job at your job, more money. And let's talk a little bit about the advantages of using a pay for performance strategy. So I'm hearing Julia saying, I was a waitress for years, and I actually didn't know this until I taught a course on motivation. But students, I didn't know that because I've never been a waitress, and I didn't realize that you didn't make minimum wage, and that you were given less than that, and that the more money you had to earn your wage in tips.
Yep.
Right?
About I think I made about $2.35 an hour. So I had to really work hard for my tips. So an example of the last type of motivation you just mentioned.
And so the harder you work, the more tables you take on, the more tips you're going to make. And so that absolutely is a pay for performance type of model. Does anyone have other examples that they've had before? I can tell you that my husband's works in the kind of an aerospace industry, and within his company, the way that leaders are incentivized is they get stock options. And so the more money they make for the company, the more stock they're given. And so that's a kind of a pay for performance model. So the advantages of this type of thing is that it can increase the quantity of performance for really simple tasks. So research that has looked at people doing real menial work in which that really just requires you to like follow a prescribed set of directions and do those things exactly as you've been told. If you pay people, they'll do more of that. And so some of this research has looked at people, putting together puzzles or like putting together like widgets kind of stuff that doesn't require any kind of creativity or problem solving. You're given directions to follow a task and you're just supposed to do it. So it's considered to be a pretty simple task. And researchers have found that when you pay people, and the more you pay people, that they're going to do these simple tasks pretty well. But here's the interesting thing, that this pay for performance model actually decreases the quality of performance for complex tasks. So any task that requires creativity, problem solving, that you're not just supposed to follow a series of directions, you're going to find that this pay for performance model actually decreases your performance, which in many ways is, I mean, this is a huge problem, because if you think of the type of work that you're likely going to take on, very little of it will be doing these simple things, that creativity, problem solving, abstract thinking. These are all the things that employers want to see in their employees. And so we know that pay for performance just doesn't work in getting these complex tasks completed. We also know that pay for performance decreases wellness. And I imagine that Julia can attest to this. When you are having to take on a million tables to just make the money that you need, you're
Yeah.
probably not feeling great. Am I right?
No, I was absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
And I did that job for 4 years, every summer, all summer. And like you said, I was overwhelmed. I worked at the Rent Them outlets, and that's a huge tourist spot in the summer. And I've never been more miserable in my life. I enjoyed speaking to people and meeting people, but the pressure of making money, and also half the time I didn't make close to minimum wage even after tips. So it was a really frustrating job. I didn't like going to work, and yeah, it was really tough working in that scene.
And it's interesting that you said that, because you got at exactly the issue with pay for performance, is that you were so oriented towards the money that you weren't able to focus on all the things about that job that might have been enjoyable. So you were focused on getting as many tables to get the most tips, as opposed to perhaps making connections with your customers, which is the kind of thing
Absolutely.
that you wanted to do.
Yes.
We also know that it decreases creativity. There's some really interesting research that says that, like, if you pay people to write poetry or to do like a creative problem solving activity, you actually find that when you pay them, people are a whole lot less creative than if you were to have them do these activities without money, which is really interesting. So if pay for performance isn't the way to motivate people, like by motivating people to give them stuff, then what do we do? So I want to take some time to tell you about a theory of motivation, that I was introduced to in graduate school, and I kind of fell in love with this theory because it helped to explain a whole lot of things about the world, and the way I want to be in the world. So I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about this theory broadly, and then we're going to come up with some specific examples. So, when we think about what really motivates people, and I don't just mean like gets people to do what you want, but what really motivates people to do things because it's important for them or because it's fun. We have to think to what is it that people really need, and the perspective that I work from in my research, um, assumes that all people, kids, adults, people, regardless of your background, regardless of what country you live in, or regardless of your culture, all have three basic psychological needs. Just like we need water and we need food, according to research, we need these three things. And I'm going to talk, let me make sure I have the slides on this here. Yeah, I'm going to talk about three needs in particular. I'm going to talk about the need for autonomy, the need for competence, and the need for relatedness. Okay. So they're assumed to be all important. So it's not like one need's more important than others. And I want to spend time talking about each of them so you really feel like you have a sense of what each of these needs are and how you therefore can foster it in the people you work with and you hope to motivate. So when we talk about autonomy, and actually I'm going to go back for a second. So when we talk about autonomy, autonomy is the sense that you are the initiator of your action, that you are the one driving your behavior, that it's your choice. Nobody's coercing you. No one is pressuring you. So it really feels, when you are working from a place in which your need for autonomy is met, you feel like you are the owner of your action, that everything is coming from within. Competence refers to feeling effective in the environment. That nobody likes to feel like they can't do well or they're helpless. And then relatedness has to do with feeling connected and feeling like you are cared about and valued by the people that you are working with or being with or whatever. And so let's talk about each of these in turn. So when we think about autonomy, or how do we meet people's need for autonomy, the first thing that's really important is that you have to acknowledge the perspective of other people. And so, what that does by acknowledging someone else's perspective, it demonstrates that you care about where they're coming from and their voice matters. And so, it kind of positions them in a place so that they feel like they have real ownership over what they're doing. And so, it feels like whatever they're doing is coming from within. You can foster autonomy by providing choices whenever possible. And so I think about this all the time as a parent. You can think about this in your work. I think about it in my teaching, but even as a parent, I think about it all the time. I want my child to feel like she's the owner over what she does, that things are coming from within. And so to the extent that I can give my 4-year-old a choice about maybe what she wears or what she eats, will help her to feel like she's the owner of her actions. And so you could imagine if you are working with other people and you have a choice over how you do things or the types of work that you're doing, you're going to feel particularly autonomous. And then sometimes you don't get a choice or you have to do things because it's part of your job. But good leaders will give meaningful reasons for why they're asking people to do a particular thing. And those reasons aren't just because I'm your boss and I said you have to. That might be a reason. It's certainly not meaningful. A meaningful reason needs to be meaningful from that other person's perspective. So if I were to ask you to do something, I would need to give you a reason for why to do it that makes sense from your stance, not just because I want it to be done. So what I'm going to do, and this is a little bit more challenging in Zoom, but I'm going to try this. I want everyone to think about a job that you've worked before. It doesn't have to be a paid job, just like some sort of work that you have done. And I want you to answer some questions. So I want you to answer, so you might need to write this down. So I want you, or I'll actually put it in the chat so that we can, you'll have it right here. So you're going to be answering questions 1, 2, 4, 7, 10, 8, and 14. Am I doing this right? There's no 8. It's just 14. Okay. 1, 2, 4, 7, 10, and 14. So what I've done here is I'm taking a standardized questionnaire that gets at the work climate to get a sense of how autonomy supportive your work environment is. So I want you to think about an environment that you've worked in before, and you're going to answer some questions. And so what I'm going to do here, let me get out of here. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second while I pull this up. Let's see. So this is a validated questionnaire. And let me reshare here. That's used to assess work climate. So I think I asked you, let me look again. I asked you to do 1. So I want you to write down, if you have a piece of paper somewhere, your response to this question. Your response can range from 1, strongly disagree, to 7, strongly agree. And you can be anywhere in the middle. So I feel that my manager provides me choices and options. So if you really disagree with that, you put a 1. And if you strongly agree, you would put a 7. And you could be anywhere in the middle. Next, I want you to do number 2. So I feel understood by my manager. So again, write down where you would fall. Again, just think of a job. It could be a job you're working now or a recent job, a volunteer experience, somewhere you're doing work in which a leader is watching you do things. Okay. Oopsie. So next, let's do 4. My manager conveyed confidence in my ability to do well at my job. And so again, strongly disagree to 7, strongly agree. Okay. And then 7, my manager encouraged me to ask questions. So I want you to write your response down from 1 to 7. And now let's do number 10. My manager listens to how I would like to do things. So you can put down anything from 1 to 7 or somewhere in the middle. So if you strongly disagree with that statement, you'd be at a 1. You strongly agree, you'd be at a 7. Okay, and last one. That's 14. My manager tries to understand how I see things before suggesting a new way to do things. So I want you to write down your response ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And now what I want you to do is total your response. And I want you to put your total in the chat. Once you've totaled it.
Professor, I might have missed a question. Was there one after question 14? No.
No.
Oh, okay, good.
Yes, that's it. Yep. Okay, so I'm seeing 17, 34, 27, 15. Let's see. Maybe some others will add their numbers in a second. So I'm seeing, so let me just tell you what this was measuring. This was designed to measure how autonomy supportive your work climate was. And so higher scores tells us that that was a climate or work environment that really supported your need for autonomy. Lower scores indicate that your need for autonomy was thwarted in some ways or not being met. So I want to take, I'm seeing 2 scores in particular that are standing out. Lori and Julia, you had, it looks like the way people's scores clustered, it looked like Lori and Julia's scores were kind of on the low end. Morgan and Chris's scores were on the high end, and then Riley, your score was kind of right in the middle. So let me take Lori and Julia's scores for a second. And so I'm curious if you could elaborate on what that work environment was like and why you think it came out that you were not feeling particularly autonomous in that role or in that job. And so you can respond, the two of you can either respond by writing in the chat, or you could, just unmute yourself.
Well, this was my waitressing job.
Okay.
Because we were so busy all the time, there was a lot of pressure and not a whole lot of room for choices. Like my section of tables was assigned to me the second I walked in the door. The number of tables I had assigned to me was dependent on the hostesses and how busy we were. And if I needed a break, I wasn't allowed. We didn't take breaks. So sometimes I'd have a 12-hour shift, and you, as a waitress, you don't get a break. So I didn't really get to say like, hey, can you lighten up my load a little bit? Because that's just not how it worked. And any issues that were brought to managers, for example, a mistake, or, hey, you scheduled me this day and I have jury duty or whatever, it didn't go well because it was their way or the highway. That was kind of the saying in there. Because understandably they had numbers that they had to reach. things like that. But it was a really, really, really toxic work environment. I actually had to quit even though I was making great money, because after a while I was just, I was so miserable, and we didn't really get support from managers, and it was kind of like an every man for himself situation. So yeah.
What's so there's so many things that you said in that was I
Hmm.
think speaks to the lack of autonomy. So for
Yeah.
one, this idea that you really had no say in anything, whether it was
Hmm.
what you did, how you did it, and so it really felt like um it sounds like it was pretty coercive, that
Yeah.
somebody higher up was making a whole lot of decisions. We also know that environments in which people can't have any discord, where there can't be disagreement, where you can't express any dissent, um, are those that your need for autonomy are not being met. That in a
Hmm.
true autonomy supportive environment, you're able to express dissent in a way that's going to be heard. That people,
Hmm.
your boss doesn't have to agree with you, but they're at least going to hear where you're coming from.
Right.
But one thing that you said that I think is really important is that you weren't blaming these people in some ways because they had pressure to meet their numbers, and we
Hmm.
know that it's a whole lot harder to be supportive of someone's autonomy when you yourself feel pressured. And so,
Hmm.
if you've ever been in a leadership position, you may experience that when you feel pressured to reach a deadline or to get something accomplished in a set time, you may take over and not allow people to voice their opinions or to solve problems on their own. So
Right.
thank you for sharing.
Sure.
So Lori, I hear you said I had a job that I loved, that was difficult and challenging, but new ownership changed how we were doing it and took away what I regarded as the fun and creative part. And you left after a year. So what I'm hearing that you're saying is that um, when I hear the fun and the creative part, it sounds like that was like the sweet spot where you were really able to do your best work and to feel like you had ownership over that. And when that part of your job was gone and you were just following the directions of higher up, it sounds like it wasn't fun anymore in quite the same way.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. So let me hear a little bit from those of you that are saying that your work climate is much more autonomy supportive. So I'm hearing Morgan and Riley. No, is it Morgan and Riley? Riley, you were somewhere in the middle. So Morgan and Chris. Um, can you tell me a little bit more about your work environment and why it is that you are saying that this work is supporting this need for autonomy?
I can go. Can you
Okay.
guys hear me?
Yeah. Who is this talking? Sorry, I can't quite
This is
see.
Morgan.
Morgan, tell me. Yes, tell me about your job, Morgan.
So I work for Res Life on campus. I'm an RA, and when you get hired, you take a strengths exam, and it ranks 35 strengths in order. And they kind of make each RA's role specific to how you operate. So I'm a very strategic and analytical thinker. And so they make my goals for that year based on that. Some people have a lot more like personal relationship strengths, and though their role is based off of that. And we have a weekly meeting with our bosses who listen to any issues we're having, and those get addressed. And they're just very understanding that we're students and let us make decisions with how we want to do programming. Like, yes, I have requirements, but I get to pick how I want to fulfill those requirements, which is amazing and definitely different to other jobs, because I have been a waitress and I know what it's like to come in and be like, here's all your things, you're doing that and that only. So this job has been very eye-opening to what like a autonomy can actually look like in the workplace.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I love this strengths inventory because it sounds like what it's doing is people are able to articulate, here's what I'm good at, or here's what I want to do, and how can we match the work assignments to the way that you want to be in your role. And so it sounds like that right there is going to make you feel like certainly that you have more ownership over the work that you do. And I'm also hearing that when issues arise, the way they're handled feels very different than the way Julia described. And that there are opportunities to have open discussions about how problems will be solved. And I also hear that while you're expected to do your job, there's a whole lot of choice in how you do it. And I think people sometimes get confused with autonomy. They assume that that means you have like a free for all. You can do whatever you want, and that's not necessarily true. There's you can still have expectations of certain things, but you have a whole lot more flexibility in the way in which you are meeting the kind of requirements of your work. And so, Chris, did you have anything else that you wanted to add about your work and why you're showing up particularly high? I don't want to put you on the spot, so don't feel like you have to. Oh, I hear it. Okay. So Chris is saying, so before work started, his manager gave instructions of what's expected, but gives an opportunity to add your voice and decide the best way to go about our responsibilities. So you're allowed to explore several options of doing our job. So yeah, it sounds like this is pretty similar to what Morgan just said, which is that sure, you have your job, but the way that you go about, doing that job is really up to you. That it's a problem to be solved, and you have lots of different ways to do that. And so, not surprisingly, we find that when climates look like work climates look like this, people are a whole lot more satisfied in their work, but they also do a much better job. And so, when we think about autonomy, I want to talk about how autonomy and competence. So we've done autonomy. Let's talk a little bit about competence. So again, competence is about making sure that you can feel effective in your role. And when I talk about this need for competence in my class, I often reference a phenomenon known as flow. So we've all been in flow before. This is when you're working on something and time just flies by. And flow has a particular quality about it. So it needs to be the perfect match between the challenge of the work and your skill. So if something is too easy, so it's low difficulty, and you're a highly skilled person, you're going to be bored. And so we've all been there before. My very first job was working at a science museum. And on days that were beautiful out, people wouldn't come to the science museum. And so my job was to pretty much sit there and occasionally, sell a ticket. So my skill, I'd worked there for a while, was high. The difficulty was really low, and I was super bored. At the other extreme, if you have a really difficult job that's taxing your skills, and so you're less skilled at something or haven't developed skills, and you're doing something really, really hard, then you're going to feel anxiety or feel overwhelmed. So you ideally want to be right there in the middle where your skills match the difficulty of the assignment or the work that you're being given. So to enhance competence, leaders can do a couple of things. And they can do more than these things, but for the time, these are the things that I would focus on. So first off, you want to remove barriers to effective performance. And so in a job, there are all kinds of things that can prevent someone from doing their best work. I'm thinking back to the example that Julia gave, which is that she had, it sounds like lots of tables and no breaks. Well, it's hard to imagine how any person could work 12 hours on their feet and do really a great job without having a break. So that would be a barrier to effective performance. And so my guess is everybody can kind of think of like what gets in the way of me doing a really good job, and a good leader will identify what those are and problem solve around them. Good leaders also provide regular feedback, and I'm curious whether or not the the RA staff, like Morgan's job, provides ongoing feedback to people in these like weekly meetings. I kind of suspect maybe that's what happens, but it's important for folks to know what it is that they're doing well, and then also give concrete information about how they can maybe better meet the expectations or standards of a particular role. So does anyone have anything to add about competence? I'd be curious to hear if people have had experiences of work in which their employers have really enhanced their competence, or vice versa, work in which they felt very incompetent in their role.
I also worked for Mass General.
Oh,
But
I did too.
I love it there. I really do. But my job, my position was too easy. It was to help them out with their publicity, and my my skill set is with patient care. So when we'd interview patients, I was like, oh, I really just want to stay on the unit with the patients and not go back to typing up newsletters. So it wasn't a really good fit for my skill set. It wasn't in occupational therapy, we actually call it the Just Right Challenge, making sure that our patient is able to do the activity, but they're a little bit challenged and it's not too easy. Otherwise, their quality does falter. And I definitely didn't put as much effort into that job as I should have, because it was just too easy.
Yeah,
it was boring.
The Just Right Challenge. That's exactly it. It needs to be it needs to be challenging enough so that you feel like you're exercising your skills.
Yep.
And it sounded like in this role, you didn't feel like you were exercising your skills.
No.
You were just kind of like doing a task, and so it felt pretty boring. Yeah,
yep.
Great example. Thank you, Julia. Anyone have another example of a role or a job in which they either felt incompetent or they felt like they were really able to exercise their competence?
I have a new job now that I started in January. That is a completely different field, using some of my skills, but I'm learning new skills. And when I'm put into a new situation and feel very tentative about it, my boss will say things like, "You can do it, Lori. You can do it. I have faith. I know you can do it."
and how does that help at all?
It's like, okay, she knows how to do this job, and if she thinks I can do the job, then I'm just going to keep going until someone tells me that you messed up.
Yeah.
So
it sounds like what you're getting at is this idea. So feedback can be as simple as like, you've shown skills before that tells me you're going to be able to do this new task or whatever, in which it sounds like in shorthand is you can do it. And so it sounds like one of the things that is going well in your role is that you are given feedback about your capacity in this role, and so you're able to feel confident even if you're doing things that you've never done before.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Anything else? I don't want to cut people off if they have any other examples. I realized that is Lindsay still here? Are we going? I kind of forget how long this goes till.
Hey, you have until about 4:50, so you still have a few minutes left.
Oh, okay, I'll rush. Okay, because we still got another need to do. Okay, so we've talked about autonomy. We've talked about competence. The last one is relatedness. And relatedness is just another word for connection, that we really need to feel connected. And it's interesting because I, for a long time, actually didn't think that this one really mattered. I thought, oh, as long as I have good work and I'm able to kind of do my own thing, I'm good. But then I worked in a place where I didn't feel connected, and I quit 9 months later. And so we know that we can foster connection with other people when you have someone that is supportive in their communication and listening. And this reminds me a little bit of what you were also saying, Laurie, which is that it sounds like your boss is providing guidance and recognition and just overall support. Like you feel like you have this cheerleader that's saying you're doing great, and I see you, and you're in this role for a reason. Fostering connection can be any opportunity to build trust among a group of people that work together. And we also know that work environments are most fun when you can create opportunities for play, because this play is an opportunity for people to really connect in a meaningful and authentic way. So I'm curious, one, do people feel connected and valued at your work? And if not, so if the answer is yes, great. How does that happen? If the answer is not, what might be something that could be done to enhance your feelings of connection? So I'm curious what people have on this one.
This definitely reminds me of a situation my mom is going through right now. She's a librarian, and she worked at our local library for almost 20 years, but she wasn't making any money there. So she accepted a new librarian position a few towns over, and she doesn't feel connected to her coworkers. I don't know if it's because she spent so much time at the other one and they became a family, or if it's the tension at the new library with all the different rules and social standards there. But she's actually considering going back to the original library, even though she made about half of the salary as she does at the other one. So I think that's a good example of just how much this factor in particularly can influence your quality of life and your well-being and your perception of how much that you feel like you enjoy your job.
Yes, it's so fascinating because this was really a blind spot for me, and I imagine could have been even for your mom. Here she has this great new job, making more money, um, and then to think that she would step back from that just because. If you don't feel connected to the people you work for, it's really hard to imagine how the work
Right.
you do can feel meaningful and important.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
so Chris is saying, I feel connected with my boss and valued. And so I'm curious, what are the things that your boss specifically does to help you feel connected? So I'll let you respond to that, Chris, either by typing or you can unmute yourself, whichever you want. And I also see that Laurie's saying, I definitely more connected with my colleagues and the people we serve. And so, Laurie, you had given, when I asked you questions about your climate, your old job, it sounded like there were a lot of things you didn't perhaps like about it, but that this new role, in addition to feeling like you have perhaps more of a say, um, you also feel valued by the people you're working with.
That's a fair assessment. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone else have anything about this? Otherwise, I'm gonna. Oh, good, we're done. Okay. Okay. So Chris is saying his boss is really encouraging. So providing encouragement is a way for a boss to say, I see you and I care about you and I want you to be successful in this role. So that's all I have here. I realize we are kind of running short on time, but I'm happy to stick around and to answer any questions that people have about this theory, about the applications, or any specific examples you have. But thank you for taking time on is today Wednesday, St. Patrick's Day, talking with me about this. And I hope everyone has a fun rest of the afternoon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Questions,
Jacqueline.
you can stick around.
For anyone still on the call, just look out for an eval to fill out for today's session on Friday. But Jacqueline, you did a great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you go quickly back to that relatedness
Definitely.
slide? I didn't get the very last item on it.
Oh, sure.
Oh, play to create something?
Yeah. To create moments of connection.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, having opportunities where people can really get to know each other outside the confines of their job and do fun things can be a great way for people to feel more connected in their work environment.
Right. This has been good. Thank you so much.